just like we had with bones, we have gross anatomy and we have microscopic anatomy. Not much there in terms of gross anatomy. I mean, it's just expanded in the shaft where they meet, the generalized location. When it comes to muscle, we're going to talk about some gross stuff, some gross anatomy stuff that we can see with the unaided eye. But there is a vast, vast amount of microanatomy that is involved with how a muscle contracts. That is our big physiology thing here. Muscle contraction needs these very small structures. Knowing these small structures will be very important in understanding how a skeletal muscle contracts. If you don't include that microscopic anatomy when discussing how the physiology of skeletal muscle for contraction occurs, then you're not answering the question right. Okay, so this is going to be a case where we talk a lot about the microscopic anatomy, and we're going to be talking about it ad nauseum over the next several slides in this lecture. From a gross anatomy standpoint, every skeletal muscle is an organ. It is a defined structure. It has its own shape. My biceps is right here. Underneath that is my brachialis. On the back side of my arm is my triceps brachii. Has a point of attachment, has an origin, has an insertion, has a defined outer barrier around it. Inside, it has connective tissue, as we'll see. It'll have blood vessels, nerve going to it. So it is its own unique thing, organ. We don't think of it like that. Think of just skeletal muscle, but it is a typical organ. Inside a muscle, inside skeletal muscle, I guess I should say, we have a number of muscle fibers. And when I say muscle fiber, it's a cell. Okay, muscle fibers, muscle cell, they are the same thing. Sometimes I'll interchange it. Sometimes the book interchanges the words. One book may use muscle cells. One book may then use muscle fibers. So there is a lot of going back and forth with the term. I'm just trying to make you aware. Okay, muscle fiber, muscle cell, same thing. Muscle fibers are going to be clumped into smaller groups. And those smaller groups are called fascicles. Okay. And within these fascicles, we'll have even smaller stuff. So the organ itself is going to be subdivided and subdivided. And that's all I'm trying to get across on this slide. What in the world does that look like? Here it is. So there is our tendon, right? There's our one end of the bone. We have an origin, we have insertion, tendon on each end. Origin is proximal, insertion more distal. But as you can see, I have a defined wrap around that thing, that deep fascia. And that deep fascia, really helps to wrap around the entire muscle belly. Kind of defines the whole muscle belly. And I think I'll talk about fascia here in a second. But when we get past that fascia, let's rip it away. Then we can see various different layers of connective tissue there. Epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. Break the word down. Because we're going to see epi means around, outermost. Peri means within. And endo means innermost. Myo, M-Y-O, or mysium in this case, means muscle. Okay? So epimysium is the outer lining of muscle. Perimysium, surrounding within. This is what's wrapping up into smaller bundles, fascicles. And endomysium, as you can kind of see, surrounding that individual muscle fiber. We're going to see the same terminology when it comes to the nervous system. We'll just use epineurium, perineurium, endoneurium. So as long as you know what the prefix, suffix, and root words are, man, makes it a heck of a lot easier to guess on an exam. The first connective tissue wrapping is that epimysium. It's dense, irregular connective tissue, and it wraps around the whole muscle. So this is what's going to be really defining the shape of that muscle belly. Okay? The biceps brachii, the pectoralis major. Okay? It's defining that total shape of that thing, not a skeletal muscle. As you can kind of see there, I have divided all of these muscle fibers into groups. Those bundles of groups are called fascicles. And that's what paramycium does. If you look at that picture, I mean, there are a lot of fascicles in a skeletal muscle fiber, or in the skeletal muscle itself. The number of fascicles can vary, and that's not really important to know. There's just a lot of them. That's all you really need to know. But you can also see in that picture, traveling within that paramycium is also artery, vein, and the nerve. One nerve enters in and branches. Okay? Artery comes in, branches. So in this paramycium, we also have cardiovascular components and nervous system components traveling through it, bringing the nutrients, taking the waste away, bringing the actual electricity to the muscle fibers so the muscle can contract. Surrounding, okay, so this is wrapping around the whole dang thing, the epimycium. Paramycium subdivides the muscle belly into bundles called fascicles. What are they bundles of? Muscle fibers. If I pull out that fascicle, pulled it out, and pulled out a muscle fiber, which is this guy right there. I'll just draw some circles around them because it's kind of hard to see maybe. Muscle fiber. Muscle fiber. Around all of these muscle fibers, all of these circles here, is my endomysium. And it's more loose connective tissue. It's really there to just, I mean, it's there for some fancy things, but none of it makes sense right now. But it allows for a little bit of electrical insulation, okay? Because as this nerve comes in here and penetrates, it's going to penetrate a muscle fiber. And that's where the magic's going to happen. We can have a very small capillary network running along the surface of that muscle fiber. And the endomysium, helps to support that. It also helps to kind of hold it together. Right? So it does some fun things. But ultimately, what does it do? It wraps around an individual muscle fiber. Okay? That's what endomysium does. And then, as you can see, there's even smaller stuff here. And that gets us into a bunch of the fun microscopic anatomy stuff. Are these easy to see? No. I mean, the epimysium is really easy to see on dissection. Okay. Teasing the rest of it out is difficult. You can only really see it on true cross sections. So if you take the muscle belly out of the cadaver, cut it in half, then you can see some very thin lines around it. And those thin lines are just the connective tissue pieces. So they're not that big. So that's the connective tissue wrappings. All of those connective tissue wrappings are around the entire muscle belly, but as it extends towards each attachment, tendon, okay, all of those connective tissue membranes fuse together. Where they fuse together and attach into a bone, I get a tendon. Dense regular connective tissue connects muscle to bone. That's what we talked about the other day with joints, and there it is there. Okay. A tendon is a cord-like structure. There's also a thing called an aponeurosis. An aponeurosis is a thin sheet of connective tissue that connects one muscle belly to another muscle belly. There's another thing called a retinaculum, and a retinaculum is a band of connective tissue. And all it does is hold muscles in place. We'll see that in the wrist. Okay, flexor retinaculum. We'll talk about that more when we look at the nervous system. Flexor retinaculum. Okay, it's right there. It's right there. It's on the flexor side of the forearm. Okay, all the muscles on the anterior side are flexors. All right, all of my flexor tendons, all of the flexor muscles are here in my forearm, and all the tendons you can see are right there. Okay, and there's a piece of retinaculum that just goes across there like a band. It helps to hold them all down, and that's all it does. So there's always more than what I put on these damn things. It may not seem like it, but there's always more. But tendon and aponeurosis are two common things. Tendon connects muscle to bone. Aponeurosis connects a muscle belly to a muscle belly. It's usually a white sheet of connective tissue, again, kind of dense, irregular connective tissue. You see it on top of the head. I don't really have a head close at the moment, but you see it on top of the head. If you put your hand on your back of your head and on the front of your head, right, and sit there and elevate, raise your eyebrows, you'll feel the back of your head scrunch up as well. Why? Because it's connected by that aponeurosis. Same thing in the belly, or around the belly, around the rectus abdominis muscles. You have the same stuff there. It's just not as easy to flex those abs to get other abs to move and feel it, right? Some other connective tissue we have associated with a muscle is the stuff called fascia. And the best way to kind of visualize it is looking at that orange there peeled. Okay. We have deep fascia and we have superficial fascia. Superficial fascia is what separates the muscle from the skin, right? It's that kind of hypodermis. Right? It's areolar, it's adipose, and we saw what that looked like when we looked at skin. So that's what that is. But if you go just a little bit deeper to that, we have the stuff called deep fascia. And the deep fascia helps, well, it's right outside the epimysium. And in a lot of cases, when you're doing human dissections, cadaver studies, deep fascia, epimysium, whew, man, really difficult to kind of delineate between the two. But it's this deep fascia that does help to compartmentalize. Okay? I believe in chapter 11, there are a couple looks at cross-section of the forearm, cross-section of the arm, the thigh, the leg. And you can see you have a superficial layer of muscles, you have a medial layer of muscles in some cases, and you have a deep layer of muscles. And it's all of this fascia that helps to separate out the individual muscle bellies. And the fascia that you find, the connective tissue that you find inside, that helps to delineate even layers within a compartment. What does that deep fascia look like? It looks like the little skin that you have around those wedges right there. They're all individual pieces, but it's that fascia that helps to bind them all together and allows them to act as the unit, to be the orange. And there is a lot of discussion as to whether or not this is technically its own system. It has some very unique qualities to it. If you've ever watched Olympics or sports at all in the last 20 years, all those athletes with the tape on them, it works on fascia, okay, which helps muscles. The concept of doing the rock tape, which is one company, or the concept of acupuncture, okay, works on this concept of helping to improve movement and motion within fascia. When fascia gets damaged, it produces this gummy substance, which inhibits the muscle from moving as effectively. And if you don't move effectively, you stop moving so your body can repair itself. Scar tissue can get in there pretty easily. And by doing, you see those stripping tools that you see some athletic trainers use, some physicians use on their athletes. Putting that tape on, that helps to break up the adhesions that we have in that fascia to restore blood flow, to aid healing and whatnot. So there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not it's its own system unto itself. It has its own kind of weird blood supply. It's unique. It's pretty cool stuff. Okay? But the fascia is there to help separate it from the skin, separates it from the organs below, and really helps to divide it up within compartments as well. So fascia is a great divider and unifier all in the same one. Obviously, I need to have a good blood supply. We're going to look at skeletal muscle fiber types. Maybe, probably not today. You are a collection of skeletal muscle fibers, 3 different types. Your genetics actually determines how much of which ones you have. Training will further dictate that as well, but you have a lot of skeletal muscle fiber, and that needs a good blood supply. So you're going to see an extensive blood supply in certain types of muscle fibers and a kind of good one in other muscle fibers. And it's there, it's not very extensive, but it's okay in some other muscle fibers, right? What do they bring? Obviously oxygen and nutrients. What do they take away? Obviously waste. And obviously we need innervation. These are somatic motor neurons. Somatic, let me put this in here, motor, M-O-T-O-R. Somatic motor neurons are what innervate. Innervate means supply with electrical input. I say somatic motor neurons because, well, we have sensory neurons. Sensory neurons bring information into the central nervous system. They tell me it's hot, cold, it's painful, sharp, soft, whatever. Motor is doing something. So if a skeletal muscle is supplied with a nerve, that's telling me it is motor because skeletal muscles contract. Somatic means body. Somatic means body. And this is stuff that you control. So this is voluntary contraction, which is different from skeletal, cardiac muscle, and different with smooth muscle. Those two are involuntary. You do not control them. This one you do. So it'll have its own unique nervous system input, and that's the somatic motor nervous system.